So while all that legislative process is going on, the bill hearings, the floor action, there's another part of the process, the most important part, that is ginning almost independently of the rest of that stuff. It's the state budget, the only bill the legislature is required by the Constitution to pass. And it's so big and complicated, I thought it'd be best if we talk to a specialist. So that's why I'm coming to see my friend, Eva. Hey, Eva. How's it going? Good to see you. So let's talk about the budget process. For starters, it's the only bill that the legislature has to pass, right?
Yes, and that's because the Constitution says money doesn't leave the state treasury unless the legislature appropriates it. So from the very beginning, this is all set up as something the legislature drives and has to finish, hopefully, in the regular session. If not, they come back until they have an Appropriations Act.
So what's the general process? You got a ton of paper here. Can you kind of walk us through what's the order of operations to get to a budget?
Sure. The Constitution says the legislature shows up in an odd-numbered year and meets for a certain amount of time. But before then, they actually have to have some documents to decide how are we going to write a budget. So the legislative appropriations process has like a request part, a stage where agencies are told, this is how you will ask for money for the next 2 years. So this is happening before legislators actually show up. And then based on these budget requests, the House and Senate both come up with different approaches. Sometimes they'll be very similar, but each chamber, the House and the Senate, is coming up with its own budget proposals. January of the odd-numbered year, that's when things really get rolling. The controller gives us a revenue estimate, again, constitutionally required to tell us how much money we're going to have. Constitution says we can't go beyond that, so it's like a pay-as-you-go balanced budget requirement. The governor can also make recommendations, but they're more like high-level policy changes. What really matters is the actual draft bills. This is just one of them, and you see like 1,000 pages of detailed recommendations for how to fund state services. Early in the session, legislators also get more detail so they can understand in the next 2 years, what are we doing compared to what we've historically done. Not just dollars spent, but people that we're serving with different kinds of healthcare, education, transport, whatever, park visits, what are we doing differently, for better or worse. And then towards the end of the session, May, usually it ends up happening around Memorial Day, the different versions of the budget have been reconciled into a House and Senate compromise called the Conference Committee Report. And that's pretty much what you're looking at here, but also any other supplemental or special session bills that might have funded the budget. So eventually we get this. This is what you would actually call the budget for 2024-25. And then once all the dust settles, the fiscal size up is like where you understand what happened, what are we doing these 2 years. It's got more history if you want it. If you're going to be an advocate, this is where you find out over the last decade, how are things looking? How is federal funding changing? I think just more history, more context if you need it. Also more information on how state government works. Who's in charge of an agency? Who appoints their commissioners? How many are there? So just like a lot of things that give you clues about how to be a good budget advocate.